My guest today is Frits Buningh.
I decided to use my database knowledge to kind of audit the Climate Change Institute of the University of Maine, who I think are misrepresenting data, temperature data to the United States public as well as the world. What caught my eye was that the New York Times always quotes the Climate Change Institute of the University of Maine as the scientific authority behind the records that they proclaim. As you can see on the slide here, the first slide, the New York Times article, Heat Records Broken Across the Earth, July 6, 2023. July 3 and 5 were the hottest days on Earth. And I thought to myself, well, that's interesting. Let me go look at it. See, is that really so? So that is where I came from. That is the beginning. So, and then the United Nations Secretary General Guterres gave a speech on June the 15th of 2023, where he called for solidarity and proclaiming the climate crisis emergency. It reminded me a bit of the 70s when I was kind of a socialist, and I ran on a slate for the university that I attended and became a student representative. And my socialist overlords would come to my house the day before the meeting where we were going to vote, and they would tell me how I should vote. And I wasn't really comfortable with that, but that was their angle. And that was the same way the Secretary General Guterres was talking about solidarity. I don't like that word as too much neo-Marxist. So I joined the CO2 Coalition in February of 2024. Dr. Happer invited me based on the Antarctica research I had been doing, and I forwarded it to him, and he liked it. And so I got an invitation, and on my bio there, I explained what I wanted to do. As a magazine system administrator, I was required to pass audits from the United States Postal Service and mostly from BPA, which is the business publication auditing system. And they want to know for real how you come up with the numbers that you say. You say you have 250,000 subscriptions. Well, prove it. Now, how are you going to prove that? That's a lot of work. So anyway, I do not trust the numbers that the Climate Change Institute puts out. So I challenged them after watching that the Labor Day weekend of 2023 became extremely cold, and they made it extremely warm. So I emailed with them and I challenged them. And after 2 months of throwing data at them and he trying to convince me that their model was the best thing that since sliced bread, he actually acknowledged to me in an email on October the 5th of 2023 that the CFS had a warm bias over Antarctica. No, I thought that was nice, and I was happy with that. And I figured they were going to change what they were going to do. And even in December 7th of 2023, they posted that statement on their website saying that the CFS had a warm bias over Antarctica ice sheet. I couldn't believe it. 2 days later, that statement was gone, and it was replaced by everybody agrees that July 2024 was the hottest year on Earth, or it was 2023 at the time, and Copernicus, the Weather Channel, NOAA, we all agree that July was the hottest month on Earth. And my statement, my bias over Antarctica just disappeared. That got me frazzled. So I was like, I thought we had something going, and I thought he was going to make some changes. He actually had made changes on their graphs. They always had a label that said OBS temperature, like as in observations. But I kept asking them, well, what stations are you observing that you then can claim that you do OBS temperatures? So on October the 10th, they actually took that off and replaced that with climatological average, whatever that means. So anyway, here you can see, so I've been kind of following them on a daily basis. I have a model of about 20 stations on Antarctica that I monitor and I record the data for on a daily basis as of about August 28th of 2023. And as you can see in the graph, that the red line is the Climate Change Institute of the University of Maine. The other three lines that are about 10 degrees colder are NOAA. The NOAA airport has their own reading that is very difficult to find, but I found it. And the University of Wisconsin has an AWS that is about 60 miles away from the Stott Amundsen station. And then there's the weather and climate .eu website, European aggregating website. And they all agree, all three of them agree with each other. But the Climate Change Institute is 10 degrees warmer. And this is a year after he acknowledged to me that he had a bias. So how can you keep doing this? So I did June here. I also did September, and I followed them, and it's the same thing every day of the week. So the auditing, I came up with an idea to audit them the same way I got audited in the magazine business. You know, and the circulation magazine business works about on the same angle as the climate change or the climate crisis industrial complex. The higher you can claim that your circulation is, the more revenue you make. In the same way that the higher you can project the temperature to be, the more you can go to your local congressman or your senator and say, hey, you know, everybody already agrees, whether that's true or not, that CO2 is the driving force behind the temperature, which I don't think it is, but that is not so material at the point. They could go and say, well, you know, the temperature's getting warmer, we need to do something. So you get things like the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really a climate bill, and the Congress keeps pushing stuff like this along. So I decided that I would do an audit of the temperatures of the Climate Change Institute and get some real data from real stations on the ground, not the satellite stuff. I mean, I see so much stuff about satellites, you know, and they all agree with each other. NASA, NOAA, even the UA, University of Alabama, at Huntsville. I want to see data on the ground that where people live. So the BPA auditors, they had a very interesting approach. They would say, okay, you say you print this much, you must go through a lot of paper. No. So how much paper did you buy? How much paper do you have in your warehouse? Let's go look. So that's the picture that you see next. Yeah, but they would actually want to walk into the warehouse and see the rolls of paper, believe it or not. I had to accompany them. And so, well, this is where our paper rolls are. So, um, yeah, clever trick. So in the same way, I want to see what is the temperature at individual stations around the world. And this audit has nothing to do with human-induced climate change, climate science in general, anthropogenic global warming, AGW, the meteorological aspect, although I'll touch a little bit on that. Or is CO2 a pollutant or not? No. Just show me temperature data that I can verify for myself, that I can look up somewhere on somebody's website. And I want to see, and I want to aggregate all that and see if I can, come up with something that makes sense. So I use various sources in order to do that. The University of Wisconsin has the AMRDC data repository, and there's a Weather and Climate European website that's an aggregator that aggregates a lot of data from the WMO and from NOAA. Now, the Climate Change Institute does something very interesting. They make predictions of what the temperature is going to be for the next how many days. And then they say, even themselves, that whatever they're saying is estimates. But their estimates become the records. So they don't have like estimates one day and then they say, well, yeah, we estimated it was going to be 20 degrees, but it really was 24 degrees. No. Whatever their estimate is becomes the record. And then next year, they make an estimate for whatever July the 4th was. And then they compare that estimate versus the estimate they proclaimed the year prior. So everything is estimates based on estimates. It's kind of like the Jim Carrey movie, The Truman Show. It's all a production down to the minute details. The estimates become the reality. And then the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Jake Tapper at CNN proclaim it. And that's what you're being subjected to day in, day out, every month, every week, every year. So the CCI temperature records and the trends, are they for real? Can we trust it? That's what I'm trying to find out. I'm not looking for an exact validation of the absolute temperature for each section. I'm just looking for, what is a trend? Can I establish a trend over time? So I created a model of 38 stations from the sources, the meteorological sources. And I have some restraints because of the oceans around Antarctica and the Arctic. So I picked 7 stations equidistant along the latitudes and longitudes, and I picked 7 stations in the Arctic, 8 stations in the midsection of the Northern Hemisphere, 8 stations for the Tropics, 8 stations for the midsection of the Southern Hemisphere, and again, 7 stations for Antarctica. So let's go look. Let's do a spot check and see what we can find out. Now, the UAH has a graph that is being reproduced pretty commonly, and everybody kind of looks at that at the gold standard. And they found that up until June of 2023, that 2016 had been the warmest year, and 2020 had been the second warmest year. Now, funny that after I added up all the temperature data of the 38 stations, which took me quite a while. I mean, it was an intensive project. I found the exact same thing. And I also found in my data that 2016 and 2020 were the warmest year, and 16 was the absolute warmest year. So, what can I say? My model must be pretty good. Now, this is the final outcome, and after I'm just showing it to see where this is going. And then we'll go through each of the section and look at what I found. But I did the data from 2012 to 2024, and the biggest constraint that I had was Antarctica data, because Antarctica is kind of a difficult place to get like solid data all the time, continuous. So I picked 12 years because I figured, well, everybody's screaming about the last 10 years being the hottest. So let's take a look at it. But then when I found that 2016 was the warmest year, I decided, well, let's go look what happened as of 2016 to 2024 and see what the trend is. And the final outcome was a flat line. The blue line is my audit, and the red line is the Climate Change Institute of the University of Maine. And when you believe it, the trend is completely flat. So now, how did I get to that? I only made this graph about 10 days ago after spending months and months accumulating data, and I had no idea where I was going to end up. So my selection criteria for the stations were basically, I want equidistant from the longitudes and the latitudes. The globe is 360 degrees, so 7 to 8 stations makes that 45 to 50. Now you have limitations based on the oceans, and then you have limitations based on the availability of stations. So I tried as much as possible, and in each of the stations, as you can see, as the slides go forward, I put the GPS latitudes and longitudes in there so you can see for yourself what the distance approximately is. I avoided large cities like Quito, Melbourne, Paris. I don't want to get influenced by the urban heat island effect for some of these large cities, like even I worked in Washington, D.C., and I biked, being a good citizen, I actually biked to work. It was only 6 miles from my apartment in Alexandria to where I worked for a while. And I would come by the airport, and there was a measuring station at the very tail end of the runway of of the airport in right on the Potomac. And it's like, so the planes are revving up and a lot of hot air, and there's a measuring station right there with a nice picnic table that you can sit at and watch the planes take off and land. John Schutschuk, a meteorologist, you should check out on X. He talks a lot about that. So I used some sources like weather and climate from the Europeans, and also Audit. And I've seen over the last couple of years that their data is pretty reliable, as I compared it with the Australian Bureau of Meteorology and the British, and I'm pretty confident that their data is up to snuff. So at the website, you can find stations from all over the world, from Antarctica, North America, Canada, wherever. And this is the AMRDC from the University of Wisconsin, where you can find the data for stations that are not covered by the other ones, just like Fuji Dome Fuji over here. Actually, a lot of people think that the South Pole is the coldest place on Earth. That is a total misconception. There's a high plateau on the eastern section of Antarctica, and the high plateau is about as large as Montana to North Dakota, all the way south to the Mexican border. That's the size of the high plateau. Now, the South Pole actually is on the lower end of the high plateau. It's only at an elevation of 2,800 meters, whereas the high plateau goes from 3,000 to 4,300 meters. And Dome Fuji, which is at 4,300 meters, is one of the coldest places on Earth. And there's a line straight down from Dome Fuji. Further down, it doesn't show on this particular slide. But if you go straight south, there's Dome Fuji, Dome Argus, Vostok, Concordia Station. That is the line of the coldest temperatures on Earth. And they're usually about 5 to 10 degrees colder than the South Pole. So the South Pole really is not the coldest place on Earth, even though that's what everybody thinks. So here's the data. I get tables that sometimes go back to the 1900s or the 1800s. And then what I did, like here, you can see from 2012, I dumped all these tables in Excel, and then I stripped out 2012, 2024, and then I put the average for the year in a table for the particular section that we're going to be looking at. So for each section, I'll start with the Arctic. And at the Arctic, I put 7 stations in, and, from Fort Good Hope, Canada, Resolute Bay in the Nunavut, Daneborg and Greenland, Svalbard, which is Norway and Ireland in the Atlantic, always kind of warm. Dixon Island in Russia, Tiksi in Siberia, and then Wrangel Island, which is really close to Alaska as the closest place. So then when you add all these numbers in over time from these websites, then you get an average. And then you can kind of see what the trend is. And interestingly enough, even in the Arctic from 2016 to 2020, it was colder. It was warmer, sorry. It was minus 7.71 degrees. And then as of 2021 to 2024, it went down to minus 838. So when everybody's saying, well, the Arctic is warming and the ice is going to melt and this is terrible. The polar bears are going to die because there's no more ice. Well, the data on the ground doesn't really support that. So when you put all of this in a graph, the interesting part here that I find, even though there's a slight warming here, but if you see that the data from the Climate Change Institute and my audit data are pretty much similar. So I would say my model and my picking of stations must be pretty good, because you don't see the trend lines in the red and the blue are pretty much right next to each other. So that's the Arctic for now. So then we go to the midsection of the Northern Hemisphere. And I started in Victoria, Canada. And, most of the, along the 45th parallel, which is kind of the center of the midsection, is up in the Canadian territory. So I did Victoria, Winnipeg, Yarmouth, and then to get, there is a long stretch from Canada to Europe, So I picked the Bermuda, which is a little bit further south, but it's still in the midsection, um, to, get a sense of what it's like in the middle of the Atlantic. Mhm. And then Bordeaux, France, Azerbaijan, someplace in China, and Vladivostok, Russia. Now, it does look that the northern hemisphere, the midsection, is warming over time. When you see 2016, 2020, here you see the 1109, and then the years from 2021 to 2024, 1131. So it's point 2 degrees, basically. But yes, there is some warming going on in the northern hemisphere. That is what my audit found. But again, when you look at the graph, my audit and the Climate Change Institute are nearly identical. The trend lines are parallel, and they're not that far apart. So again, I must say, my picking of the stations must be pretty accurate, even though I only have 8, but it still looks very, very, very similar and very close. So after the midsection of the northern hemisphere, let's go look at the tropics. Now, the tropics, I picked them, along the equator as much as possible. I didn't vary much north or south. The tropics really runs from 23.5 north to 23.5 south. It's a very large area. But I picked them along the equator, and I started out in Ecuador, Guyana, then go over to Africa, Cameroon, Kenya, and then Sri Lanka. And as you can see, from the longitudes, they're pretty much 40 to 50 degrees apart. Then I ended up some places in the Pacific, was the Solomon's Island and the Christmas Islands. But the interesting part here is that 2016, 2020 are warmer than 2021, 2024, but only by 0.2. But the northern hemisphere was warmer by 0.2. Now here, the tropics are cooler by 0.2. That's interesting. I wasn't expecting that. I thought, we've basically been told that 2023 and 2024 were the hottest years on Earth, and that is kind of the question I want to answer with this audit. Is that really so? So I was expecting 2023 and 2024 to be hotter everywhere. It doesn't really look that way. Again, when I plotted that out, and now my plotting and the CCI and my audit are beginning to diverge. They no longer parallel. They're no longer the same. The CCI definitely has a warmer trend, and my trend is pretty much flat. Now, when you look at the CCI website, the Reanalyzer website, you see the orange line here and the red line here. Those are 2023 and 24. They're trying to present temperatures that are way warmer than the average. Now, my audit doesn't substantiate that at all. Now, how they get their data, they have a model. It's called ERA 5, and I've asked them, in the 2 or 3 months that we were communicating in the fall of 2023, I asked them multiple times, at least 20 times, give me the stations on Antarctica that you are validating your temperature with. And they would hem and haw and tell me, well, you should really read this academic article that is the basis of our model that dates back to 2010. And then you would understand. I said, no, I don't want to. I'll read your academic article, but I want you to tell me what stations are you using to validate your numbers. Well, I can't tell you that. You have to read the paper. So after 20 times, I stopped asking. It's all, estimates based on estimates, based on previous decades of estimates. So now, there's something big that happened in early 2022. Some huge underwater volcano blew its top and blew billions of gallons of water into the atmosphere. Now there's a meteorologist, John Schuchdag, who is also on X, and he talks about this a lot. And when you see the UAH graph from the current time, they have a spike here for 2023. But my audit doesn't really show that spike. But he shows that it's cooling after the Hunga Tonga effect is maybe waning. So, we all know that water is a greenhouse gas, and maybe the biggest greenhouse gas, 75% of the atmosphere, is water vapor, and carbon dioxide is only 0.04. So water does a lot more to retain heat. So this is what Shusek said. While climate alarmists continue to scream about global warming, which is based on failing climate models, climate realists know we've begun a global cooling period. Well, okay, so what I did, I said, okay, so inspired by what Shuchuk was saying, I split the tropics in two sections. I said, well, let's look at Ecuador to Sri Lanka, and let's look at Malaysia to the Christmas Island, and see if I can find some difference if I split the tropics in half. And now this gets very interesting, because the section from Ecuador to Sri Lanka actually shows a dramatic cooling from 2012 to 2024. Whereas the next section from Malaysia to the Christmas Island shows a dramatic warming. Even my audit is warmer than what the CCI is saying. This is kind of interesting. But when you look at the spikes here, the CCI has spikes. My audit spikes are bigger. But then you put the spike here from my audit next to the UAH. Yeah, that looks about right. So, I can't speak for the UAH. I can only speak for my audit. Okay, so that's the tropics. Now let's go look at the midsection of the southern hemisphere. There's a lot of ocean in the southern hemisphere. So it is difficult to find stations all the way along. And I wasn't really able to keep with the 40 and 50 degree difference, especially when you go from Australia to Africa. I found one little island in the middle there called Alfred French territory. But when you look at the data, the audit data of the midsection of the southern hemisphere, 2016 are warmer than the 2021 to 2024. Again, not by much, around 0.1.5, but something. But again, here, when you compare the graphs from the CCI with my audit, my audit is pretty much flat, or maybe a slight, ever so slight boom. And the CCI is always going up and up and up. That seems to be their go-to thing. Now, before I go to Antarctica, I want to talk a little bit about Patrick Moore. He wrote this book, The Threats of Doom, and he's basically saying the biggest way of hiding something is to do it in places that are so far away and so distant that no one can go there. And so you can claim whatever you want. And that is kind of what Antarctica is. You cannot really go there. You know, I subscribe to a Facebook page for Antarctica because I kind of would like to go. And a 2 weeks excursion to Antarctica is like $10,000. That'll be a while before I'll be going. But anyway, Antarctica is kind of where things get a little out of hand as far as the way the CCI is proclaiming data and the way of what I find, because that has been my focus. So I created a model of 7 Antarctica stations. And when you compare my model average and the average of the CCI, you see we're about 5, more like 6 degrees difference. That's a lot of difference. But since the Antarctic is only about 4% of the Earth, but when you calculate that out, you end up with about 0.1 degree, and that can influence the world temperature in a way. And, you know, the world temperatures are like, the records are, you know, a very, very, very slight. So a 0.1 degree difference on Antarctica makes a big difference. Now, in 2023 and 2024, I've been reading that Antarctica is melting faster, 10 times faster than anywhere else in the world. Sea levels are going to rise, and we're all going to drown. Bangladesh is going to drown. Florida is going to drown. And I'm not finding that. There is a slight warming from 2012 to in the trend, but actually, if you look at the trend, you know, it's going up to here to 2018, and then it's going down, 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 down. So we're not really looking that much at the melting of Antarctica. So what I did is I calculated all these sections, the temperatures, and then I went and calculated the total square miles of the Earth. And I calculated, I looked up what ChatGPT and other people were saying the circumference of the Antarctic and the Arctic are, and I established by using the NOAA distance, latitude, and longitude calculators what the square miles were of the midsection, the tropics, and the southern hemisphere. And I assigned allocations, percentage allocations to each section, and that's what I based the temperature calculation for the world temperature on. And then, lo and behold, here it is, 2016, and my audit of 38 stations is 15.882, and 2020, 878. But when you notice this, the differences are very, very slight. You know, we're looking at less than 0.1 degree, and most of them. So the whole idea of 1 year being boiling hot, like the United Nations Secretary General, is basically a tempest in a teapot. I mean, even you can't even proclaim and say 2016 was boiling hot. I would never say that. I would say, well, that all looks pretty steady. Steady as she goes, and slight differences from 1 year to the next. But there is no boiling hot in here anywhere. Not 2016, not 2020. I would never proclaim that. So this is the overall audit that I came up with, and from 2012, my audit shows a slight, ever so slight warming, and the CCI shows a dramatic warming. So then what I did is said, like, okay, well, I know that 2016 was the warmest year. What if I just take the last 8 years and see what happened there and do the trend lines as of 2016? And then you get a surprisingly different picture. Now, for the Northern Hemisphere, yeah, we're pretty much aligned. Me and the CCI are, looking at the same trend, and pretty much the same overall. 2023 and 2024 are the warmest. I agree. My audit agrees. But now, when I look at the tropics, I see a slight cooling from 2016, 2024. And again, the CCI does its same thing, always hotter, continuously. The Southern Hemisphere is pretty well steady, ever so slight cooling a little bit. The Arctic, or the Antarctic, is cooling somewhat. So, sea level is going to rise in Florida, real estate is going to collapse on the coast, and Bangladesh is going to drown. I'm from the Netherlands. We build dikes in order to keep the water out. We've been doing so since the 1200s, and it works very well. So I would suggest that people, instead of, banging on the climate hysteria, just build dikes. That works where I come from. Now, in December of 2024, not so long ago, there were a multitude of articles about the Arctic, and that the Arctic would have its first ice-free day by as early as 2027. Now, we've been told by Al Gore and his kind that the Arctic is going to be ice-free in the next 10 years, way back from the late 1990s. Now, is that really so? When you actually take a look at the data of my audit and even the data of the CCI, now look at this, we're parallel. Me and the CCI both agree that the Arctic, as of 2016, 2024, is getting cooler. That's interesting. You don't hear that much in the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Guardian and Jake Tapper of CNN talking about this trend. So we're back to the slide that we looked at in the very beginning, where I explained what this audit was going to be all about. And we see that, again, the trend as of 2016, 2024 is pretty much flat. And again, talking about the CCI, why I don't trust them, I explained it before. They're always 10 degrees warmer on the South Pole. So and that has been my focus, going and looking at the rest of the globe as only something I've done for the last half a year. But since they are doing that here, they may very well be doing that in other places as well. I have no idea. I can't substantiate that. It's just a thought that I have. If they do it here, why not do it somewhere else as well? But that's just conjecture. Now, I took a class at the Allegheny County Community College in data analytics, and they make me work in R. So I put all that data from January 1st to September 30th in an R plot. You can see over time, if it's 30 degrees, this is like summertime in the Antarctic. The temperature, it goes about -20, -30. And then in the wintertime, it goes down to -70. And you can see distinctly as it gets closer to peak Antarctic wintertime that they constantly did make the South Pole warmer. Yeah, it's a pretty clear trend here, I would say. So, recapping the audit, the Northern Hemisphere looks reasonable, plausible. Both the Arctic and the midsection on the 45 parallel north, I would say if I were an auditor and this was my job, I would say, yeah, I have no problem with that. The tropics, the tropics looks very stable, whereas the CCI is trying to tell people that in the 2023 and 2024 are very warm. That is not what I found. The Southern Hemisphere is cooling, whereas the CCI is making it warming and much warming. And Antarctica is totally off the rails. I mean, it's 5 and 6 degrees too warm on average. And the trend also is warming, and I'm not finding it. So overall, I would say that the audit is a fail, mostly because of the Southern Hemisphere. So there you go. My audit, the Climate Change Institute of the University of Maine failed my 38 station audit. Now, what's interesting is there is a climate scientist, not a climate, she's an environmentalist scientist, Dr. Jennifer Monahasi of Australia, wrote an article about Antarctica, and it caught my eye because I was reading it right around the time that I was seeing the problem of the Labor Day weekend being very cold and the CCI making it very warm. And this is what she had to say. I can think of a large number of ways that the University of Maine's climate reanalyzer could possibly generate a higher than average temperature for Antarctica and especially the Earth. Indeed, the larger the geographic area covered, the more opportunity for creative accounting, for which corporates using similar techniques will go to jail, while climate scientists are more usually promoted. I say that is exactly what I found in Antarctica on Labor Day 2023, which inspired me to do this audit. Now, as a bonus, as of late, we've been told that January 2025 is the hottest January on Earth, and this is the Yale, some climate group out of Yale, painting the Earth in maroon paint. So I decided, well, I have all these stations, and I could go look up what January 2025 did for those stations that I've been following, and let's see what it comes out. So I only did the midsection south, the tropics, and the midsection north. So now, when you look at the southern hemisphere, is 0.37 colder. The tropics are 1.4 colder on average. And the northern hemisphere is 0.42 colder. And so much for the screeching of the climate experts. Believe the scientists, that's what you've been told. So we're 2023 and 24, really the hottest boiling years. That's not what I found. And again, I wouldn't say that 2016 was the most boiling year either. It's all, the Earth seems pretty steady, you know. Now, most of the data and information that we get come from models and satellite data. Now, here's the Heritage Foundation did an analysis of all the models, 36 models of the UN, and you see they love extrapolating out straight into the future, always going up and up and up. And the blue line is more observations. This is very much in line with the University of Alabama at Huntsville, where you see 16 warmest, 22nd warmest, and then cooling. Well, I'm sure this is a much larger group of data that this is based on, but it's very much in line with what I found. Now, the data from meteorological stations and satellite data, they are up 500 to 800 miles, 500 miles up in orbit. So, can you really say that you get accurate data from being 500 miles up? I have an issue with that. I did some research and I found the raw data from the NOAA satellite, and they show here what the satellite passover is and where they get the data. And you see the blue lines. The blue lines is where the data pass over the Earth and they gather the data. But the white space in between, they didn't gather the data. So somebody has to interpret it. So either some scientist or some graphic artist or some intern who have an axe to grind, because on the weekend, maybe they go glue themselves to the road on I-94 and stop the traffic, or they go to the museums and throw tomato soup on Van Gogh. But during the week, this is their day job. I don't know. I'm just being a little bit sarcastic here, but anyway, it has to be interpreted. So 50% of the data has to be interpreted from the satellite, what I can see here. Now, I'm not an expert on satellites, but I just look at this and say, well, I don't really trust much anything about this. And the University of Alabama, I emailed with Dr. Roy Spencer, and I asked him, and I showed him my slides, and I asked him what he thought of it. And he says, well, what you're looking at and what I'm looking at is quite different, because the lower troposphere, up to 10 kilometers up high, we're measuring things that has nothing to do really with which is on the ground. They're measuring temperatures, in a range of -8°C, and then somehow they extrapolate out with some kind of an algorithm or a mathematical formula that is 14 degrees on the planet of the Earth. I don't know. I'm just saying I didn't find. I find satellites. I am not convinced. Now, on the CCI's own website, they're saying that all their data should be validated against weather stations observations. But this is not what they do. They don't do any observations of stations. And even Roy Spencer made that comment in his email to me, is that the CCI doesn't produce data. They just produce models and they make estimates and they make proclamations. But why don't they validate their data from stations on the ground? And that is exactly what my audit did. So I say, somebody give me a staff and a big computer, I could do a much better job. That's my plug. So my slideshow and PowerPoint is also available on my website, www.AAADTS.com, Nelson 2025. I put all the slides up there last night, even though the OneDrive was giving me headaches and I had to finish it at 2 a.m. because they wouldn't sync. But it's all up there, so without the narration, though. And then I thought this morning, well, wouldn't it be interesting? I already have all these Excel data graphs for all these stations. I did January. Maybe I should do February. So this morning at about 9 o'clock after breakfast, I decided to do February and to see what comes out. And so here is the Southern Hemisphere. Here's a teaser. What could be next? Maybe as the year goes along, I'm just going to follow my 38 stations and see if January we already saw wasn't really hotter. Now, what about February? So when I did February this morning at 9 o'clock, it shows that February of 2024 was 17.76 and 2025 is 17.22 for the midsection on the stations that were available. So that's half a degree colder already for just the first 2 months. So that is my teaser. Maybe I'll do the rest of it as well. I mean, before 11 o'clock, I didn't really have time to do more. I just picked the Southern Hemisphere. And that is it, Tom. So my analysis is the climate crisis, there's not really any there. The Earth is pretty steady as she goes. It has been warming some and maybe now it's cooling some, but on average, it is pretty steady as she goes. So that is my take.
Okay, do you have time for a couple of questions?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. I have all the time in the world.
I'm very curious about what you're saying about that UAH satellite data. That are there people other than Roy Spencer? There are maybe NOAA employees that are doing interpretations of what's going on in the white space. Is that true or no?
I don't know. That is not my expertise. I mean, Chuck, it talks a lot about the Hunga Tonga driving it up in the Pacific. But he said he asked Roy Spencer questions about the satellite and he didn't respond. So,
do you have any personal opinions about how long before that Hunga Tonga effect goes away? Are we close to it going away, or it's going to hang around?
I'm not a meteorologist. I just do data. I report data. What I see, I don't know whether that lasts or not. But to me, from the graphs, it does show pretty well that it is a localized effect. That is what my graphs, splitting the tropics into 2 sections, it shows it's a localized. So the thought that I had was, since Hunga Tonga blew, maybe some of the satellite people decided to focus more on the Hunga Tonga area and make the satellites fly over to see what's happening. And that got picked up. But again, it's not my expertise. I don't know anything about satellites. I just don't trust them.
Do you have any sort of order of magnitude idea of how much it would cost to do this, having your own staff and your own big computer to produce something that might be more accurate than the data sets we have now?
Yeah, not much. I live on Social Security, and I produced all this on $1,700 a month.
Okay.
I am, you know, I just have a laptop and a fancy computer, and I just like dig for the data.
All right. I love what you've done here. Do you have any other points you'd like to make before we finish up?
No, I think I laid out my case in my slideshow, and I would suggest people would go and look at my presentation online at my website, and that they will also look at other research that I've done. I've done a lot of research on Western Antarctica and Bird Station, and I actually found that Bird Station, August of 2023, had an all-time cold record. And Anthony Watts from WUWT swiped that data off my LinkedIn page and made an article out of it. But NOAA has this tool where you can plot in a GPS location, and the NOAA tool will give you what the temperature data is for that GPS location. So I did that, and NOAA doesn't acknowledge the August 2023 record at Bird Station. Now, there was an academic paper by Tomanek et al. He wrote about the cold winter of Western Antarctica was really record cold. There was an academic article around that. There's also Andreasen et al. 2023, who did a study of the ice sheet on land of Antarctica and shows that it's growing from 2009 to 2019. So there are several academic studies that back up what I'm saying, especially the Tomanek et al. 2024 is a very good study, very good read. He validates the bird record poll that I found. I already found it in October of 2023, and I published it on LinkedIn, and then Anthony Watts picked it up. But nobody else will talk about it. I found it, and nobody ever picked it up and wants to publish things like that, because it does not. It doesn't support the narrative. So, in the same sense that when I challenged Professor Sean Burkle to do a news conference on Labor Day 2023, instead of doing a news conference, he decided to make his temperature go 8 degrees up as of the same day that he got my email. So I always wondered if I had not sent him the email, maybe he would not have gone back into the office, and the Labor Day weekend would have come out cold, because it was quite striking. I sent him that email late Thursday, and by Friday morning he did a 180-degree U-turn. And I always thought maybe I should have kept my mouth shut, and the cold record would have happened. So I shot myself in the foot. But anyway. What can I say? But I like the bird record on my website. It does show that there was a warming trend up to 2010. And then as of 2010, there's a cooling trend. And you can see it at Bird Station. You can see it at the South Pole. You can see it at Concordia Station. And I put the graphs up there. If you go to my website and look at the tabs on top, you can see each of them. And, Dr. Jennifer Marahasi liked my research. I emailed her after I read that article, and she responded very positively to me. And I helped her do an analysis of Fuji Dome from 1995 to 2023 we pulled all the data for the winter months of June through September, and I helped her do that. So we became good friends during that time, and she's been very supportive. They just have a new book out from Australia, Climate the Facts 2025, and Ian Pilmer has a really good article in that book that I would really suggest a lot of people read. He's a geologist, a mining professor from Australia, and he talks a lot about the influence of geothermal volcanoes all around the world that are heating up the oceans from below. And also, he has a long-term geological perspective as a mining engineer. And I am too a mining engineer. And, going to the coal mines in Germany and finding, wood sticks in the tailings that are millions of years old kind of gives you a geological perspective of time that, everybody always screams, well, it's hotter, and this is the hottest it's ever been. Well, it isn't so. They're finding so much wooden evidence of glaciers that are melting, of trees up in the Arctic and Alaska that are tree trunks that are the size of tropical trees. So, the whole idea, even Greenland was probably green at one point in time. So whether it all melts or not, that really isn't anything new. There isn't anything really new under the sun. But, I would suggest people take a serious look at my website. There's a lot of data there. And there's a lot of graphs that support it. Even NASA knows, and they have it on their own website, that the South Pole has been cooling as of 2010. I even have a NASA article that that says that, but they will never go on TV and talk about that. They only put it on the back page on some website that nobody ever finds. So the whole narrative of the climate change is just like I said before. It's like the Jim Carrey movie, The Truman Show. It's produced, it is manufactured, it isn't real. The data on the ground doesn't support any of it from my perspective.
Okay, on that note, I will let you go. Thank you very much for your work. And then I will put your Twitter handle and your website. I'll put those links in the show description so people can look at more of your work. Thank you very much.
Oh, all right. Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it.